Namaste. So I wanted to do this short reading of an excerpt from the Yoga Vasishtha. This is the translation by Vihari Lala Mitra that I'm reading from. It's a 4-volume translation. And so the Yoga Vasishtha, as you may know, is an ancient text which relates the conversation between Sri Ram and his guru, sage Vasishtha. And this excerpt that I'm reading from is from book number 7, and it's the first chapter, which is called On Unintentional Acts and Actions. And this chapter, it says, is about the manner of how the liberated should conduct themselves in life with renunciation of their egoism and selfish desires. So basically, this little excerpt that I wanted to read is about action and how the wise act, basically, as Sage Vasishtha tells Sri Ram. And I feel like it's such a relevant dialogue, such relevant words that Sage Vasishtha has spoken, because many of us find ourselves at many times in our lives questioning our actions and what action we should take, what decisions we should take, and especially when we come across these teachings from the ancient scriptures which say that we should act with detachment. So like the Bhagavad Gita has this message of acting with detachment, and it also talks about, the wise see action in inaction and inaction in action. And it can be really confusing when we feel like, oh, we're supposed to be detached, but still we're supposed to act in life in a way that that shows that we're invested in the result somehow. So we often feel like without desire and without that kind of personal investment in the consequence, we feel like it's going to be difficult for us to act. So how do I be detached and still care about the action that I'm doing and still fulfill all the duties that I have to perform? Because there's often the feeling that if I'm detached, then I'm not going to be interested in doing anything at all. Or even if I do, I'm just going to put in half effort because I don't care about the result. So these kind of questions, I think many of us have faced within our own minds. And so I think that this excerpt is just really, really beautiful in that respect. So it begins with Sri Ram asking a question of Sage Vasishtha. So he says, the renunciation of the notion of one's personality or egoism in his own person, being attended by its evil attendance of inertness and inactivity, it naturally brings on a premature decay and decline, and the eventual falling off of the body in a short time. How then is it possible, sir, for an indifferent person of this kind to practice his actions and discharge the active duties of life? So this is what Sri Ram is asking. What I was trying to explain earlier is that one who has lost his personal sense of his egoic sense of himself as being a particular personality, how is such a one going to have any interest, such an indifferent person? How is he going to practice his actions and discharge his duties? And so Sage Vasishtha replies, it is possible, Rama, for the living person to resign his false ideas, and not for one that is dead and gone. Hear me now to expound this truth, and it will greatly please your ears. The idea of one's egoism is said to be an idealism by idealists, but it is the conception of the signification of the word air or vacuity that is represented as the repudiation of that erroneous notion. The idealists represent the sense of all substances as a creation of the imagination, while it is the idea of a pure vacuum which they say to be the resignation of this erroneous conception. The idea of anything in the world as something in reality is said to be mere imaginary by the best and wisest of men. But the belief of all things as an empty nothing displaces the error of thought from the mind. Since all things are reduced to and return to nothing, it is this alone which is the everlasting something. So, just stopping there for a little bit. So the first thing that he's trying to address in Ram is that you need to get rid of false ideas, and to do that, usually what the wise say is they give you the opposite idea to replace the false ideas that you have. So he's saying the idea of one's egoism was in place earlier, so that's what you were believing yourself to be, an ego and a limited personality. So he says the idea of a pure vacuum, which they say to be the resignation of the erroneous conception. And the signification of the word air or vacuity is represented as a repudiation of that erroneous notion. So there's an erroneous notion that was in place earlier, where you were taking things to be real which are not real. So he's saying the idea of anything in the world as something in reality is said to be mere imaginary. So you had all these false constructs that were operating in you, and so then the wise told you that all of that is nothing. So they replaced that with another idea. So the belief of all things as an empty nothing displaces the error of thought from the mind. Since all things are reduced to and return to nothing, it is this alone which is the everlasting something. So he's addressing a slight misunderstanding that might be there in Sri Ram's mind, where Ram is saying that if I've lost this sense of myself as being in charge of my life and myself as this ego, then how do I carry out the actions of my life? And so Sage Vasishtha is saying that that you had this erroneous belief about yourself being this ego, and that was replaced by the wise man telling you that that's not true, and actually everything is nothing, and all of that, your previous beliefs are imaginary. But that was only to get rid of the initial beliefs. So there's a slight subtle danger that is a slight misunderstanding that seems to be in Sri Ram's question, where he's taking the second position, which was given to basically just erase the erroneous first position. That second position he's taking to be literally true, and so therefore he's saying that if I'm in this position now, then how am I supposed to act? And so Sri Vasishtha is explaining why those explanations were given of things being nothing, those things being an empty nothing, basically. So then he goes on to say, "Know thy remembrance of anything is thy imagination of it only, and its forgetfulness alone is good for thee. Therefore try to blot out all thy former impressions from thy mind, as if they were never impressed on it. Efface from thy mind the memory of all thou hast felt or unfelt, and remain silent and secluded like a block after thy forgetfulness of all things whatsoever." So he's saying basically you need to remove all impressions from your mind as if they were never there in the first place. And then he goes on to say, "Continue in the practice of thy continuous actions with an utter oblivion of the past, because thy habit of activity is enough to conduct thee through all the actions of thy life, as it is the habit of a half-sleeping baby to move its limbs. So he's saying, just forget about everything, release your mind from all the thoughts of the past and all the thoughts you've had about anything, because all of those ideas have been your imagination only. And then remain secluded like a block after thy forgetfulness of all things whatsoever. And then he's saying, but then carry out whatever is your natural movement in life, carry out your natural actions with an utter oblivion of the past. So he's saying you don't need to take any direction from the past or any ideas, because that's the misunderstanding we often have, is that I need to carry the context of my life and all the past and the memories with me in order to discharge my present duties. And he's saying, no, it's the habit of activity is enough to conduct all the actions of your life, as it is the habit of a half-sleeping baby to move its limbs. So he's saying there's already been a past momentum that's going to carry through your actions in the present time, and you don't need to bring in the added baggage of the past and other ideas and your own personal sense of doership and your own personal desires. So, as they say in the Indian tradition, they talk a lot about karma, and they talk about these 3 types of karma. The first is trying to remember what I had studied in yoga philosophy when I did a course at Shivananda Ashram, and they taught us all these things in yoga philosophy. And so the 3 types of karma, which are like a bag of arrows, so it's like a bunch of arrows in the quiver. So they say that there's a sanchita karma, which is the accumulation of all your past karmas, and that's like all the arrows that are in the quiver. Then they say that the second kind of karma is prarabdha karma, which is the karma that applies to your present life, and that's like the arrow which has been let go of the bow. So when you shoot the arrow and it's let go by the bow and it's in motion, that's the prarabdha karma. And the third is yagama karma, which is the action that is accruing, that you're creating in this present life, and that will bear fruit later on. So that's something that can provide a context for what he's saying when he's saying that there's already a momentum, there's already a force of habit, and you presently can function with utter oblivion of the past, because that momentum will carry through all the actions that are needed to be carried out by you presently. And he goes on to say, it requires no design or desire on the part of an actor to act his part, whereto he is led by the tenor of his prior propensities, as a potter's wheel is propelled by the pristine momentum, without requiring the application of continued force for its whirling motion. So, O sinless Rama, mind our actions to be under the direction of our previous impressions, and not under the exertion of our present efforts. So that's exactly what I just explained. So it doesn't require any design or desire on your part. And the prior propensities of past lives have already set everything in motion. Then he says, hence, inappetency has become the congenial tendency of your mind, without its inclination to the gratification of its appetites. The leanings of men to particular pursuits are directed by the current of their previous propensities. The predisposition of the mind is said to be the cause of the formation of the character and fortune of a man in his present state, which runs as a stream in wonted course and carries all men as straws floating along with its tide. So again, he's saying that previous propensities have already dictated the predisposition of your mind and the formation of your character, and the stream is going to take its course, and men are just as straws floating along on the tide. Then he says, I am proclaiming it with a loud voice and lifted arms, and yet nobody will hearken unto me when I say that want of desire is our supreme bliss and summum bonum. And yet, why is it that none would perceive it as such? So he's saying that nobody is trusting what I'm saying, even though I'm saying it so emphatically, that not wanting anything, so to be desireless, is your supreme bliss. You don't need desire to perform action. So you don't need to take on this attitude and this personality of being the one who is performing the actions. And with that sense of being the one who is performing action, you bring in a lot of other baggage with you, because then you create reasons for why you want to do something. You create reasons for success and failure. Then you become subject to happiness and sorrow depending on the result. So there's so much baggage that comes in with your sense of yourself as an ego performing actions. So he goes on to say, oh, the wondrous power of illusion, that it makes men to slight their reason and throw away the richest jewel of their mind from the chest of their breast wherein it is deposited. So this is the power of illusion, this Maya that makes us believe that we are in charge and we have to interfere with life, we have to make things happen, and not trusting the flow of life that has already been set in place. Then he says, the best way to inappetence is the ignoring and abnegation of the phenomenals, which I want you to do. So inappetence means losing appetite. So he's saying lose appetite for all things which are phenomenal, which are changing. And know that your disavowal of all is of the greatest boon to you, as you will be able to perceive in yourself. Sitting silent with calm content will lead you to that blissful state before which your possession of an empire will seem insignificant, and rather serving to increase your desire for more. As the feet of a traveler are in continued motion until he reaches his destination, so are the body and mind of the avaricious in continual agitation, unless his inappetence would give him respite from his incessant action. So those who are greedy for more, who are greedy for achieving a particular outcome, and whose minds are taken in by the phenomenal appearances that they perceive, they have no rest and no respite from incessant action. Then he says, forget and forsake your expectation of fruition of the result of your actions, and allow yourself to be carried onward by the current of your fortune, and without taking anything to mind, as a sleeping man is insensibly carried on by his dreams. Stir yourself to action as it occurs to you, and without any purpose or desire of yours in it, and without your feeling any pain or pleasure therein. Let the current of the business conduct you onward, as the current of a stream carries down a straw in its course. So he's saying, just move with the natural, allow yourself to be moved forward by the natural flow of life and flow of things, and without any of your personal desires and intentions, which only create friction and only create more karma, and they only create agitation in you. And he, as he said before, trust me, your supreme bliss is in being without desire. Then he's saying, take to thy heart no pleasure or pain in the discharge of the work in which thou art employed, but remain insensible of both, like a wooden machine which works for others. Remain insensible of pleasure or pain in thy body and mind and all the organs of senses, like the sapless trees and plants in winter when they bear their bare trunks without the sensitiveness of their parts. Let the sun of thy good understanding suck up the sensibility of thy 6 external senses, as the solar rays dry up the moisture of winter plants, and continue to work with the members of thy body as an engine is set to work. So he's saying, withdraw all your, let's say we can maybe call it energy for a want of a better term, or withdraw your mind from all your outer senses. Let them not be seeking gratification in the world, in the phenomenal world, and let yourself be carried by the natural flow, while you yourself remain indifferent to pleasure or pain. He's saying, restrain thy intellectual pleasures from their inclination to sensual gratification, and retain thy spiritual joy in thyself for the support of thy life, as the ground retains the roots of trees in it very carefully in winter for their growth in the season of spring. It is the same whether you continually gratify or not the cravings of your senses. They will continue insatiate, notwithstanding all your supplies, and the vanities of the world will profit you nothing. So he's saying, whether you go and try and gratify all your senses, whether you indulge your senses with the things of the world, or whether you don't do that, in any way the senses will be in the same position. They will always be insatiated. And he's saying the thing is that all the vanities of the world will not be enough to satisfy your senses. They will remain unsatisfied. If you move about continually like a running stream, or as the continuous shaking of the water in an aerostatic or hydraulic engine, and be free from every desire and craving of your mind, you are then said to advance towards your endless felicity. Know this as a transcendent truth, and capable of preventing all your future transmigrations in this world, that you become accustomed to the free agency of all your actions without being dragged to them by your desires. So this is very much contrary to our own learning, or mostly in life we're taught that we need to have desire, we need to have a personal will, we need to have goals, and we need to be passionately and emotionally involved in things to achieve results. And here he's saying that that's absolutely not required, because he's not saying it so directly, but he's saying that there is no individual doer of any action. It's all being carried on by life. And the sooner that you understand this and behave accordingly, then the sooner you will be free of your own actions, and they will happen in a kind of freedom. They will be actions that are happening by life through your body and mind, and you will not be pulled from one side to the other by pleasure and pain. You will not experience agitation, and you will remain content and calm. So he says, pursue your business as it occurs to you, without any desire or purpose of your own towards its object, but continue to turn about your calling as the potter's wheel revolves around its fulcrum. Neither have in view the object of your action, nor the reward of your action, but know it to be equally alike whether you refrain from action or do it without your desire of fruition. So it's like a state of equanimity where it's the same to you whether you are doing the action or not doing it, because the fruit of the action is not something that you are concerned with. So he says, but what is the use of much verbosity when it can be expressed in short and in a few words that the desire of fruition is the bondage of your soul, and your relinquishment of it is fraught with your perfect freedom. There is no business whatever for us in this world that must be done or abandoned by us at any time or place. Everything is good that comes from the good God. Therefore sit you quiet with your cold indifference as before the occurrence of any event. So he's saying neither do you have to do anything in this world, and neither do you have to abandon any action. So I think we have to be able to grasp that subtlety where he's not saying don't do anything, which means just go and retire to a cave. He's also saying don't abandon anything. And it can be difficult to understand what exactly he's pointing to if we're not familiar with some of these kinds of teachings or this kind of satsang. So it's really worth deeply contemplating what is being spoken about when he says that don't do, but also don't not do. Because also not doing is a doing. So he's saying sit in a kind of indifference, but it's not, there's no qualitative judgment of indifference, which we normally associate with that word. What he means is a kind of neutrality. Saying, think thy works as no works, and take thy abstinence from action for thy greatest work, but remain as quiet in your mind in both your action and inaction as the divine intellect is in ecstasies amid the thick of its action. So what he's saying is that you don't have to be mentally involved in whatever actions are going to be performed by you. And in not being mentally involved, you are not projecting, you're not imagining, you're not having expectations of how it should be, how things should be. And so you're avoiding a lot of the psychological drama that we create around action, avoiding feelings of guilt, feelings of regret, feelings of deep sorrow when things don't go our way, frustration, anxiety, worry, all of these things. He's saying they're unnecessary and they arise because you are personally identifying with action, whereas that's completely not necessary. So saying the instruction that he's giving is remain as quiet in your mind in both your action and your inaction, and think of thy works as no works. Know the unconsciousness of all things to be the true trance yoga and requiring the entire suppression of the mental operations. Remain wholly intent on the Supreme Spirit until thou art one and the same with it. So he's saying keep your mind on God and perform all the actions without any mental or emotional attachment to the actions. Being identified with that tranquil and subtle spirit and divested of the sense of dualism or existence of anything else, nobody can sorrow for aught when he is himself absorbed in his thought as in the endless and pure essence of God. Let no desire rise in thy indifferent mind like a tender germ sprouting in the sterile desert soil, nor allow a wish to grow in thee like a slender blade shooting in the bosom of a barren rock. The unconscious and insensible saint derives no good or evil by his doing or undoing of any deed or duty in his living state, nor in his next life. So, as we said before, when you are not personally identifying with the action, then you're not incurring any karma in them. So, there's no merit or demerit that's accruing to you. There is no sense of duty, nor that of its dereliction neither, in the minds of the saintly yogis, who always view the equality of all things and acts, and never consider their deeds as their own doings, nor think themselves as the agents of their own actions. So he's saying the state of the yogis is one where, because they're not identifying with the actions that are happening through their body and mind, so that they're not saying that one thing is my action and another thing is not my action. Like for them, the sun rising is my action, me having a cup of tea is my action. So they are viewing the world with that kind of oneness of vision, that kind of equality, and that exempts them from any kind of responsibility or any entanglement with the actions that they may appear to be performing. He says the consciousness of egoism and the sense of meity of selfishness will never release a man from the miseries of life. It is his unconsciousness of these that can only save him from all sorrow. Wherefore it lies in the option of everybody to choose for him either of these as he may best like. There is no other ego or meity excepting that of the one self-existent and omniform deity. And besides the essence of this transcendent being, it is hard to account anything of the multifarious things that appear to be otherwise than himself. So he's saying that all is the divine and all is God, and there is no ego apart from the one self-existent one self-existent God. The visible world that appears so vividly to our sight is no more than the manifestation of the one divine essence in many, like the transformation of gold in the multiform shapes of jewels. But seeing the continual decay and disappearance of the phenomenals, we ignore their separate existence. We confess the sole existence of the one that lasts after all and forever. So he's saying, as you remove from your mind the attachment to the phenomenal world, to the attachment to the appearances, as you efface these from your mind, as you leave yourself without any thoughts, then this continual decay and disappearance of the phenomenals will lead you to a state where you are ignoring the separate existence of things, and then you are seeing all with a oneness of vision, and you're not then identifying and saying that this is my action and that is another's action. When this false sense of ego is dropped, then you just reside in your natural state of bliss, and you stay content, and you stay removed from the realm where there is pleasure and pain, where there is action and the accrual of the fruits of those actions. So I think that's a really beautiful and such a powerful and important excerpt from this book, which is full of such beautiful gems. This one in particular, because at least for me, there was so much confusion earlier about, they're saying do your duty, do your action, but don't be attached to it. And then there's a sense that if I'm not attached, if I'm not caring about the result, then how am I supposed to do my best at it? And so there is this element of surrender that comes in. You can call it surrender when he's saying that there is this flow of life, and you just remain removed with your personal intentions. Don't let those create friction in this flow. So you can view it as surrender, or you can view it from the Jnana Yoga kind of perspective, where he's saying to withdraw your attention from the phenomenal appearances, and he's talking about, your actions are already being carried forward by a current that has been in place already from past times. So I'll stop there, but I'll be happy to hear any questions or any thoughts that you might like to share. So feel free to write into me, and I'd be happy to take up any of your questions or any of your thoughts, anything you might like to share. Thank you for listening, and I wish you a very beautiful day or evening ahead wherever you are. Thank you. Bye for now.